Here in the second half of Articles of News, we welcome in Corey K. Ward, the unofficial, official temple, everything for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Also a relative of Elder Ballard. This is Elder Ballard's nephew and cousin and brother, Corey K. Ward. Welcome in.
Wow, I'm honored.
Yeah. Don't claim it, though. Don't claim that you're any of those things or you're in big trouble. Corey comes in and he talks about all things temple with the church. And I'm excited for this first one because you and I got quite the opportunity to be able to go see the St. George Temple before it gets opened to all y'all. We got to go in a little bit early, and then before it obviously gets rededicated. Tell me a little bit about your experience.
Let me tell you, it was bougie. Like,
Yeah.
if you go to a normal open house, you just kind of get shuffled in. But if you go to a VIP, it's bougie. First of all, you get a personal tour by a couple. I was in a group of about 12 or 15, and we weren't rushed through the temple. We had a great explanation of things, and then in the chapel, they took our names, they welcomed us, and then they even had nice dinner and desserts, or like lunch and desserts afterwards. So
Yeah, the pulled pork was pretty good, huh?
Yeah, I really like that.
Pulled pork sliders, and they have, I imagine, because I was just there the day before you, that they have brought in all of the nice furniture into the cultural hall in the Stake Center, right across from the St. George Temple, which was interesting too, because people that are local will remember that Stake Center was first of all torn down, and then rebuilt, and then burnt down, and then rebuilt. So it is the newest of the new as far as chapels go. So tell me what you thought about the temple. I thought there were some pretty interesting things as I went through.
Yeah, let me talk about some of the news about it first, and then I'll talk about the tour. I think that will make more sense.
Yeah.
So, a little bit before I think it was like the 9th or something, they opened it up to the media. Matthew Holland was one of the general authorities that was guiding tours.
Which is interesting because isn't he serving as a mission president right now? I'm pretty.
Okay.
Or is he done? Because he was serving as a mission president. Maybe he's an area.
Maybe done. I think he's just done.
Okay.
It's been 3 years.
Okay.
So obviously, he has roots there. With his parents being from the area. One of the other general authorities noted that the temple will be anticipated to last 50 to 75 years without a major renovation. So it was quite intense what they did with the renovation. Another day, they had a tour for the blind, a tactile tour, which is interesting to see how they did that. But they allowed them to kind of like brush their hands against some of the things in the temple and everything. So,
well, I found myself
that we weren't there.
So there was within the temple, there are these like blue, kind of royal blue, like heavy, what looks like maybe velvet curtains. I don't know. I don't think it's velvet necessarily, but I found myself going, "Ooh, that feels nice." A couple times, like sneaking and being like, "Okay," and a couple chairs that had some pretty intricate kind of fabric work on it too. So when I saw that come up, I was like, I hope they weren't referencing me touching everything. No, it was, a tour for the blind, which is incredible. I think it's awesome that we're thinking about all of the ways in which more and more people can experience the temple.
Yeah, definitely. The church provided some information about the temple. Let me just run through some of these facts quickly, and then we can just appreciate how, I guess, historic this temple is. So it was announced in 1871. If you notice on the top of the temple, they put that date on there that wasn't there before. Sections of the temple, though, were dedicated before it was finished, just like Nauvoo and Kirtland. That happened. The temple endowment was first transcribed by Brigham Young and Wilford Woodruff, who was the first president. The endowment had been passed on along word of mouth ever since Joseph Smith. So
interesting. Okay.
These ordinances were standardized. They were first done for the dead. And then Daniel Wells, who was in the first presidency, dedicated it. Brigham Young was ill. He died later that year, but he, I guess, is the one that fully dedicated the temple. And then Wilford Woodruff was basically the pioneer president of the temple. He recorded 25,000 baptisms for the dead, 12,000 endowments, and almost 4,000 sealings in the first year of the temple.
Jeez.
And later that year, he recorded a vision where he saw some of the world leaders, and he performed their ordinances for them. And then in just a year after the temple was dedicated, it was struck by lightning, and it burned down the wooden spire that was there. So they constructed a bigger one out of fiberglass. And it was kind of the first temple where they separated, basically, they had public space and then they had ordinance space, and then they kind of got rid of that public space and just focused the temple on the private ordinance space.
Which was interesting. So in our tour, because they take you everywhere in the temple, they took us to the assembly hall, which, from what I understand, had just essentially been rotted. They weren't, before they did the refurb of everything, like they wouldn't allow people up into that space because of how bad it was. They were afraid, for people's safety and stuff like that. And then the discussion, and get ready to be quizzed, Corbin K. Ward, the
Okay.
Pharaoh. There are 7 temples with assembly halls. Can you do it? Can you name the ones?
Okay, well, St. George, obviously. Then there's Logan, Manti, and Salt Lake.
Okay.
4 Utah ones.
And
then Nauvoo had a smaller one reconstructed in there. Los Angeles, Washington, D.C.
Look at you. See?
And that's 7, yeah.
Yeah. Nailed it. The one that I forgot was LA. I knew DC did because that we had mentioned that when we had the rededication. But if people don't even know what we're talking about, if you look in the Kirtland Temple, which technically, another one, but not owned by us, it's the large room where on either side, you sort of see this depicted when the prophet Joseph Smith sees the Savior when the temple is rededicated, and Oliver Cowdery, and you see the picture of Christ kind of on the pulpit east side of the Kirtland Temple. Those assembly halls are only in 7 of the temples, and it's interesting to me to think about that. Not necessarily interesting for like Logan or Manti or Salt Lake or St. George, but when you start to get into some of these other ones, like Nauvoo, because of course it was a remake of the original, sure, that makes sense too. But then I start to muse about like why Los Angeles, a temple built 80 years or some later,
that one stumps me, I tell
or
you.
Washington D.C. and the thing that I think is genuinely, I think that they probably thought that it's like, hey, here is a this coast kind of place that we can meet, and then obviously that's why they have one in D.C. as well.
Yeah, the church, they published a nice little history sheet and a fact sheet about the temple that's worth looking at. I'll run through basically really fast what it says. Basically until the 1930s, it was basically like Kirtland, where there was 2 assembly halls on the top and the bottom, and then the basement was for ordinances. But eventually, they did endowments down there too, but eventually they just needed more space. So they started to use the lower assembly hall. They kind of put partitions to make different spaces. But in the 1930s, they went through a big renovation where they got rid of the lower hall and they replaced it with ordinance rooms that moved in a progressive style, like we know from the Salt Lake Temple, how that used to be. And then they added murals to kind of show the different stages in the endowment. But in the 1970s, they removed those murals and they made all the rooms stationary and covered over many of the pioneer aesthetics with 70s interior stuff. And then some of those murals were restored in the 1990s. So as we get to this renovation that just recently happened, there were several important changes that happened. One is that there's a new entrance in the baptistry on the south side. And then on the north side of the temple, there's a bride's exit where the marriage parties come out and wait for the bride and groom to reveal themselves after they get sealed. The temple annex was completely replaced, and they replaced it with a new one that matches better the exterior of the temple. Before it kind of looked like a cheap knockoff of what the temple looked like. And then on the back side of the temple, they had a grand staircase. They completely took that off, demolished that, replaced it with a new one that also matches better, have new staircases, elevators, and such. Something also that happened was that they replaced the cupola on the top of the temple. The top of the temple has changed a lot through the years, so it changed again. this renovation. It was originally white, now it's a kind of a dark gray. They added that new holiness to the Lord inscription. And then
Which
something
is there on
important.
the east side, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, it
Big,
looks more
big.
like this the Salt Lake Temple one,
Yep.
with that lettering and everything from the era. And then they took out the remnants of the murals, but they basically repainted them, each with a different artist. They kind of resembled some of the originals. And then they replaced all the glass, which I was told before you could tell what glass was original in the temple because it was like wavy.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the old glass, it's like drooping.
Mm-hmm.
So
What was I gonna? Oh, did you know? Interesting. And I haven't read ahead to see if you mentioned this, but it doesn't look like you do. Did you know the reason why it has so many sealing rooms? It has like 30 sealing rooms in the St. George
17.
Temple.
17.
17. Yeah,
Really
a
long.
ton.
Which
That's
is
a
more
ton.
I think it's more than what the Salt Lake Temple used to be even. I think it's gonna have more eventually, but yeah.
But do you know why?
Is it because in the temple fact sheet they mentioned that obviously this is the only temple for many years in Utah, and so the route down to St. George was called the honeymoon trail because you get married and then you go on your honeymoon to St. George. So I'm assuming it's because just a lot of sealings were performed.
Yes, probably. And
Okay.
up on the top floor, and I didn't know this until my tour, there used to be like essentially like hotel rooms. It was like a bed and breakfast. You could stay.
Okay.
You could stay in the temple while you were there doing ordinance work because, as you mentioned, people would come from all over. This was only a temple. They didn't have a place to stay. And so on the top floor of the St. George Temple, some of those ceiling rooms, in fact, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 of them were like little, your little hotel room. And so they
Okay.
those into, it's wild. I love it. I love all of it. I love its uniqueness. I love that it's not modular. I love that the people of St. George are like, yes, please build that here. I love all of the parts of the St. George Temple. It's so much different to me than so many other of the different temples. I just thought it was crazy unique and awesome to be able to be a part of the rededication. I know a lot of people, I'll be curious to see the numbers, but I know a lot of people, because Salt Lake folks go down to St. George to get a break. You know that temple open house is just going to be huge.
Yeah. It's a very different temple. If you went to the Saratoga Springs Temple, if you're going to go to the New Red Cliffs Temple, this is like the complete evolution. This is like the ancestor of all temples. And so I'll go over some of my impressions of the tour. One of the things was the clear windows. I mean, almost all temples, I'm pretty sure all temples, like I can't think of one that has windows that aren't opaque in some way, that are stained glass or whatever. There's clear windows. And so when you're like sitting in the baptistry area where they do the confirmations, you can just look up kind of in the basement. You look up and you see just the outside, people walking outside. And so you could be sitting there waiting to get confirmed, and then people could be looking in and like see everyone dressed in white and everything. Also, it was really pronounced in the assembly room. You could just see that red rock on the windows and everything. So that was baffling to me.
Anything else from as you kind of wandered around? There were two things that I wonder if you noticed. One, there's a picture, and I think I mentioned this, but maybe I haven't. But there's a picture, and I want to say it's outside the baptistry, where it has like the Savior or John the Baptist, and they're baptizing, and there's people gathered around, right? And normally you see that person depicted as a young man, or even, the Savior being baptized. In that particular picture, it is very pronounced that it is a woman being baptized. And I thought that was pretty powerful because, art for the time, certainly for that situation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You don't often see a woman being baptized. I think it's great. I'm there for every bit of it. It was so very cool to see that picture. Did you notice that picture?
I didn't.
Yeah.
What I did notice in the baptistry is that there's like these old images above the mirrors in the baptistry.
Yes.
And I asked the person what they were, and originally he was just like, oh, they're just like generic Pioneer chapels.
They're not.
But I said one of them, I think, is the Pine Valley Chapel. But then he couldn't tell me what the other one is. And if there's a listener that can tell me what the other chapel is on that image, I would love to know.
so I think one is the Pine Valley Chapel, and I think the other one is either the Hamblin home or Brigham Young's home in
Okay.
St. George.
Well,
That
it had
was
like a tower on it, so I
yeah,
don't
that
know.
was what we came up with.
Okay.
But yeah, and that I think that's OG stuff on the on the in the
Yeah.
baptistry above those. I think those are original, and that's the thing, and why I love you so very much. There's my proclamation, is like you and I are the same way. We're like, yeah, it's great. And the thing that was funny is that we were the first tour of this stake presidency, stake president and his wife taking us through, and they were very good about like, hey, all of like your factual, like, what's this, when was this, who is this, we don't know this, but we want you to feel this. And so I at least appreciated this. And um when we would ask a question that we didn't know the answer to, he would say, "We appreciate you asking that question," and she would write down what the question was. And when we
Oh
got
yeah.
done, like she came up and was like, "Hey, do you really need to? Do you want to know the answer? Or I'm going to search this out and be able to send it to you. Is there a way that I can send this answer to you?" And I know they can't do that for everyone. And when we get into hundreds of people, there's all those things. But I thought that was pretty powerful to be like, "Hey, your question matters, and we want to be able to get back in touch with you and tell you what that thing is." So it was pretty cool.
Love it.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things was that also happened in the bride room, which is new to the temple. Someone that was in the tour pointed out that those chandeliers that were in the bride's room were some originals from
Oh,
the temple.
really?
They said only a few chandeliers in the temple are original. They also added a skylight in the bride's room, which is stained glass, and that they told me that was the only stained glass in the whole temple.
Hmm.
Something is also interesting in the marriage waiting room. There was like a bookcase that had looked like some really old looking books in there. Someone can tell me like what those books are and if they're just decoration or if they're really old. That would be cool to know.
Well,
Um,
so we asked about that, and they said that they were replicas, because I was like,
okay,
"What
yeah.
is this?" And they're like, "Well, they're cool looking," and I was
They're
like,
cool
"All right,
looking.
all right." Yeah, because
Gotcha.
I mean, you think about it, in a day and an age where people are, sneaking their phones in and trying to, that they can't do something like, "This is an original $1 million Doctrine and Covenants just hanging out here in the celestial,"
Yeah.
it's unfortunate, because it would be cool to have some of that in there. But yeah, we were told it was just sort of decoration.
Something I didn't know before the tour was that in the chapel, which is where you wait to start an endowment session, they have these large murals on both the front and the back. We only saw pictures. The church only released pictures of the front, but there's also pictures of it in the back. Um, these are copies from the original St. George Temple Annex, which was recently demolished. But they got a digital copy of these paintings. One is of the Ascension of Jesus, and then the other one is of Jerusalem. And yeah, they replicated those big mural paintings in the chapel.
Which is pretty cool the way they did it too, because as I understand it, they took really, really amazing, immaculate pictures, and then if you look real close, it's like almost like a wrap on your car. Like they got all the different intricacy and dimensions of all the things in the room, and then it's just sort of like cut and wrapped on the wall. It's incredible, some of the stuff that they do, because
Yeah.
if you don't look real close, you go, "Oh, that's a painted mural on the wall," but then you look close and it's like, "There's pixels, look at that."
Okay. Yeah, I wish I would have looked that closely. From there, we took the grand staircase all the way up to the assembly room, which is what you were talking about. They told me also the floor was completely replaced. They completely replaced all the pews, but they did a really good job of making it feel like these pews were like from the pioneers, like wooden pews with sloped
Mhm.
seating and everything. They pointed out the acronyms that are on the podiums on each side. There's the Aaronic priest on the west and the Melchizedek priest on the east. I have a link that has the names of those acronyms if you want to look it up. So
Yeah, the
um,
resources that you put together for the show notes on this is just incredible. People could spend, an entire Sunday studying all this stuff. It's pretty cool.
yeah, and then I really like the new murals that were painted in. I really liked in the garden room. They painted, this is pretty original from these pioneer temples is they put 2 trees in the garden room. One is obviously the tree of life, and the other the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And they pointed out that the evil tree has a serpent in the branches. So like an interesting detail to look for there. I really like the celestial room too. I like the chandeliers in there. I like that they had like golden beehives above the windows. I thought that was pretty cool. Just like some older temples, they have ceiling rooms that connect to the celestial room. So they called this the East Ceiling Room. It's one of the 17 ceiling rooms in the temple.
Uh, so one last thing that I just wanted to point out, and then we should probably move on because we got about 5 minutes to get through an historic date of the church and temples. As you go into, I believe it's the men's changing room for the endowments.
Mm-hmm.
The piece of art that's there as you make your way into the changing rooms. I'm not sure I imagine that if you saw it, you would have mentioned it. It's a gentleman in the priesthood laying his hands in a priesthood fashion on a black gentleman. And I thought that was pretty powerful. I hadn't seen that piece of art before, but
yeah, if you saw the women's room as well, they have a lady that I think is being blessed by someone as
yeah,
well.
it's incredible.
But I have seen those paintings in the Provo Temple before. So they
really?
are kind of being circulated amongst all the temples. But it is historic that it's in the St. George Temple, because I mean, it was dedicated in a pioneer time when like black people weren't really welcome. And it's Dixie,
it's Utah. It's Utah's Dixie. Yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say.
So,
all right, so now here we go. We are rushing through
we're
all
gonna rush
the other
through all
stuff.
these. Tell me if you want to save them for later. But
no, I mean, let's get as far as we can. Maybe we'll have you come back. The time is only because well, I gotta go take my dad. He's going on a fishing trip.
okay, yeah.
So I have to take him to the airport. And I said, Dad, there's a new, never mind. I'll take you. That's fine. You can ride the train, whatever. Yeah, maybe we get as far as we get. And then on our next articles of news, anything that we don't get, we can bring you on in. We have to get to the triple temple dedication. Let's get at least that.
Okay, yeah. On Constitution Day, September 17th, there was 3 temples dedicated. Like we mentioned before, it's a milestone, but like it's a scheduling milestone. It's just kind of a happenstance because of schedule. Their President Hinckley dedicated a temple on a Saturday and a Sunday, and then someone else was on a Sunday. So technically 3 were the same weekend, but it's a scheduling thing. So I'll accept it. But yeah, Brasilia, Brazil, temple number 180. It was dedicated by Nilo Anderson. He spoke Portuguese throughout the dedication.
Significant.
He used to be an area presence in Brazil. It's the 10th temple in the country. And then Bentonville, Arkansas, number 181. David Bednar, who lived in Fayetteville, Arkansas since 1980 to 1997.
As a professor, correct? Is that what
professor?
It was?
Yeah, at one of the universities before he went to BYU, Idaho. This is the first temple in Arkansas. And then Moses Lake was number 182, dedicated by Quentin L. Cook. He used to be the area presidency of that in that area in the northeast or northwest. And then it's the 4th temple in Washington.
And the 182nd temple. I'm a little offended that you didn't say that Elder Bednar spoke English as he dedicated the temple, and Elder Cook as well as he dedicated the temple. When we start to point it out for one, Corey K. Ward the Pharaoh, we need to point it out for all of them. Anything significant? I mean, you pointed out some of kind of the factual things as far as that goes, but is there anything that we go, oh man, they said this that we didn't know? Or sometimes there's that little bit that gets part of the dedication that people go, anything like those?
Sure. I mean, Elder Anderson in Brazil, he spoke pretty like grand. He's like, because it's the 10th temple in Brazil, but he says because it's in the capital, the Brazil will never be the same after this temple. The influence of the temple will touch an entire nation. So
yeah,
it's pretty profound.
And Jason, some of the pictures of this, and we've been sharing them from our social media. So if you haven't found and followed the Cultural Hall, you definitely should. But like some of the pictures from Moses Lake and even the one from Arkansas, pretty incredible the way that they're able to, and I love this about it, that they're able to incorporate some of the local things so that you go, oh, okay, that flower is locally native, or that, whatever the thing is that's depicted. I appreciate that. We don't, as much as we do make some things the same, we do take some things and go, yeah, let's incorporate this into the inside of the temple. So pretty significant. All right, let's wrap it there, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
So next time we chat, we're going to talk about the Lethbridge, Alberta temple, the Lagos, Nigeria temple, Austin, Kona, Cody, Wyoming, Heber Valley, all of the things. You can find and follow us on YouTube, where you can see our good looking faces. You can become a Patreon saint. Go to patreon.com/The Cultural Hall. Corey, I hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body.
I hope that if you were sick or otherwise afflicted, that you can be here next week.
And that when the time comes, you'll be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, we'll be saving a seat for you
On the back row
of the
Cultural Hall.